But I didn't like it that much, and I missed actually building shit. Like I wanted to make stuff, and I didn't get to do that. And a lot of times I would sit down with a founder if I could, and I'd say, here's what I think you should do, or here we'd work out a strategy, and then they'd go off and they wouldn't do any of that stuff. And it'd be frustrating.
Hey everyone, you're tuning in to the Founder Hour with Pat and Posh. We're here with Jeff Solomon. He's a serial entrepreneur who's founded and sold multiple businesses, which we'll get into. Jeff, it's a great pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks guys. Good to be here.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So the way we usually like to kick off these podcasts is really like get a sense of your upbringing and maybe your childhood.
Oh, really? That far? You can go that
Yeah,
far?
we don't have to go.
We're trying to go very far back, and you're not that old, so you know.
All right, get into the real dysfunction.
We found that it really matters, and we see a lot of things that we noticed, like, oh, you were like this as a kid, and now you're doing this. So,
Right.
So yeah, we don't have to go too deep into it, but tell us a little bit about your upbringing. I know you grew up in LA.
I grew up in LA, but I wasn't born here.
Interesting.
I was born in Connecticut. My dad was like a pretty sort of hardcore corporate guy that went to Wharton and worked at big companies and was like always that kind of guy. And so he also moved around a lot. So I was in Connecticut till I was like 7, and then we actually moved to Toronto in Canada.
Wow.
That was supposed to be like a 2 to 3 year stint, and then we ended up staying there 11 months. It was very short run. It's a cool place. Toronto was cool.
Yeah, I could sense that there's a little bit of Canadian in you.
Can you? No, I don't have. There's no Canadian there. I didn't catch any of that. I skied a little. I should have started playing hockey while I was there, but no. So that was just like a year, and then I did move out to LA, and my mom was like, "I'm not moving again," so we stayed in LA since then.
And why did you move out here? Was it for your dad?
Yeah, he got another job. Like he just kept, moving up from like corporation to corporation. And the thing was like growing up, he never worked for anything like interesting. Like it was like he worked for a long time. He worked for this company Playtex, which makes like bras and panties. And for like an 8-year-old, it wasn't interesting. It might be more interesting now. Like I could maybe have some use for that, but at the time it was not. And then he worked for like Max Factor Cosmetics, and it was like lipsticks and stuff. And if he had a daughter, I was the only child. If he had a daughter, maybe that would have been interesting. But
and what was his role? Like what did he do?
He was like a senior exec, so eventually becoming a president of these companies, and he good at managing a lot of people, and he became really good at like fixing companies. Mm-hmm. And so he stopped being this like guy that would go in as an employee, and he started getting brought on by like private equity firms into these like deals that are falling apart. Okay. And that's when it actually started to get interesting in terms of the companies that he was working for. So I was like sort of headed out. Like I think maybe my junior year in high school or sophomore year in high school, he got the movie theater company Mann's Theaters. You know Mann's Theaters, the Mann's Chinese Theater. Yeah. So that company went through bankruptcy, and so they brought him in, and he was basically president of Mann's Theaters for like 18 months. So it would be a short thing, but he would go in and like try and fix it or take it through bankruptcy and try and get the private equity firm, whoever the banks were, as much as they could. And so that was cool. Like, I got to go to movies for free. I had this card. I remember I had this like gold card that I could go to any movie, anytime, unlimited people, unlimited concessions. It was like, that was like the best.
You're like, Dad, don't leave.
Yeah, that was cool. That was like the first company he ever was like, it was like interesting to me. Yeah. But also it just wasn't, what he was doing was not that interesting to me. I didn't know I was an entrepreneur at that time or would be, but I definitely did not relate to the type of stuff that he was doing. Mm. And I don't think, even looking back, he probably didn't really relate to the way that I looked at, life and myself. I was like, having lemonade stands and car wash things and like trying to figure out ways to make money and just, trying to shuck and jive, as my dad would say, So we were kind of very different, but he respected it. He was like supportive, and he was never like, oh, you got to go to Wharton like me. And he was not like that, which is cool.
So what did you do after high school?
Well, first, let me just tell you about high school a little bit. I sucked at school, and it was not, for a lack of trying. Like, I was a hard worker, and I went to Brentwood, which is pretty intense college prep school, and so I just looked bad because I didn't get great grades on tests, and I didn't fit that mold. My SATs weren't so good, and so but it's a big college school, so they're like, oh, you apply to all these schools, you apply to 15 schools, you'll get into these great schools. So I did, and like 14 or 15 schools, and I got into one school. And so it was obvious where I was going, and that school was Arizona State.
Party school?
Yeah, which at that time, like, nobody prior to me at Brentwood had gone to Arizona State. It was like,
you were the pioneer.
Yeah, it was like
you
Penn
pioneered
and
that,
Berkeley and like Stanford and stuff. And then since then, like I think one or two people have gone to ASU, so it's not
paved the way.
big. Yeah, I paved the way. But it was like it turned out to be like the best thing for me because I actually wasn't dumb. You know, I left high school thinking that I wasn't very smart. Like it didn't appear on the outside that I like knew anything. But I actually did learn a lot of stuff. I just wasn't able to apply it in the structure of traditional school.
Yeah, you're like, what am I learning all this for? Because I'm not applying it right now. So it's kind of just like someone's just speaking to me in a classroom. And I don't feel like I'm learning.
And I don't like respond to like memorize, regurgitate, the standard sort of methodology that school uses, especially then. Like now it's evolving a little bit. And in fact, I'll share on that because I actually now also teach. So I didn't think I really knew much. Right. But then when I got to college, I actually did very well without having to do a lot of work because it's a lot more loose. It's like sort of like, hey, find your own path. Like if you can get an A this way, like it's cool with me. Yeah. So it turned out to be like a great place for me. And
You studied English in college, right?
I did study English.
Why is that? Did you want to go to like law school?
No, I didn't. At the time I didn't know what I wanted to do. So again, because my dad was this business guy, I'm like, I'll go into the business school. So I started as a undergrad business major. And I took like the first courses, which was like macroeconomics and microeconomics stuff, and I got an F in macroeconomics.
Nice.
But in English, which English was my worst subject in high school. Like I was like, I'm gonna take English 101 and 102, and then I'm out. Like that's
book
it.
Reports and stuff. You had to
read
books
I was I'm done. But then I got an A in English. I'm like, this is weird because a lot of the other kids in the English class were really struggling. I was like, that's strange. And I was like, well, I don't really need this business thing. I'm gonna switch. So I just switched to liberal arts, and then I realized also that you could take a lot of these like electives, like art and stuff like that, and that would count for credit in the liberal arts college. So it was like just a much smoother, straighter path. It was just basically the simplest and straightest path, which is really what entrepreneurship has been all about for me. It's like, what's the simplest, straightest path to the result that I'm looking for? And that's kind of what I did.
Which was what though? Like, what did you have in your mind? Like, I'm going to graduate college and I'm going to do.
I didn't have anything. I just wanted to graduate college. I was like, I just need to get decent enough grades that I can like party and have a good time and enjoy my life.
Still make it out alive.
Yeah, and still get out of here. That was the goal. And then when I finally did graduate, I had to sort of figure out what I was going to do. In fact, my dad, when I graduated, my dad was in this organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. So like growing up, he had a lot of like wealthy friends that owned companies and not a lot of entrepreneurs at that time in YPO, more so now. But he had this one buddy that owned this company that made, at the time, CDs were like a thing. There wasn't MP3s and stuff like this when I graduated high school. And they made like all the guts for Case Logic. It was like the main case company. And he's like, oh, you should just go see my friend. He's got this company. They make like sleeves and stuff. Like maybe he'll have a job for you. And I went to see this guy like a couple months before I graduated, and he's like, well, I don't know what you're good at or what you're going to do, but your dad's a really smart guy, so I'll just hire you and you can figure it out. And it was actually perfect because like I came to that company and like transformed it. It was like old. The company's been around for like 50 years. It was like very stale, no fire, no thought around product development. It was always responsive, like, hey, we need this. And they'd be like, oh, we can build that. It wasn't like, hey, what if we build this? And then maybe we can find people to buy it.
But where were you getting that knowledge and wisdom from? Was it just you kind of assessing the situation and being like, I think that should be what we do here? Or was there actually like a working knowledge and, you had the facts and you had the research done?
No, there wasn't anything there. I mean, I got there not knowing what it was going to be like. I mean, in fact, the first thing they asked me to do was to build their website. People didn't have websites at that time, and I didn't know how to do that. But I was on the web, and I was like getting into that. I'm like, I can probably figure it out, which I did. And then as I did that, I got to see like all the areas of product that they have and all the licenses and like all the stuff. It kind of was like a crash course in their business. And then as I was doing that, it just intuitively dawned on me. It's like, well, what about this? Or maybe we could build that. Or like, oh, I see you have that machine. It's making these things. We have this other category over here. Why don't we make these things? And I just sort of started to get creative. And at the same time, the other thing that I learned there was like business process. I had this like false assumption that like any company of size, and in that case, they had like, a couple hundred employees. They were doing like 40, 50 million in sales. Like it was a big company. And I was like, any company like that has their shit together. Can you swear on this podcast? Or is like
Absolutely. Go for it.
like they did, like had their game on. They like knew what they were doing. And as we would go through things, they would like we'd work on a new product and they'd go through the steps to like bring a product to market and be like, well, why do you do that way? I'm like, oh, it's the way we've always done it for like the last 20 years. Like, it was just weird. It doesn't make any sense. Like, why don't we try this? Yeah. And then I started to implement these like processes, like simple stuff, like Excel spreadsheets and like checklists and just junk like that, just logical, like intuitive stuff. And then people were like, oh my God, this is like way better way to do this. Like, and they really got on board and people like really liked the energy that I brought. And so it was like a very big ego builder for me. And
kind of hearing about how you did literally all that, right? And you kind of just, you have your hands in pretty much everything. And like kind of hearing about who your dad was and the, what the roles he played in the companies that he worked at. And then I think I saw online that you said you've done everything from like cleaning, like, the janitorial stuff all the way to being CEO. So why do you, before I get into that, like at this time, did you ever think like, I'm not really focusing on anything? Maybe 10 years from now, I don't know if I can continue to do everything. I have to like to have a focus.
No, I never had that thought. I didn't really like, especially at that time, I wasn't really looking that far ahead. It was just sort of like, what's the next action in front of me? And I probably, to some extent, I'm still that way. Like, there's some negative effect of that for certain. But generally, I was not like thinking about like, oh, if I do this, like everything for everyone skill set, like, is that going to screw me later?
Because I feel like there's this like lifelong debate of like, is it better to be a generalist or a specialist, right? And oftentimes, generalists, I found that could be more stressed or more depressed because they don't have like a clear focus. Yeah. So I'm just curious, like if you ever felt that way.
Well, since I've had many experiences and thoughts around that, at that time I didn't. I was just very much like, this is cool. I'm getting to do lots of stuff. I hadn't done anything before, so I had no previous like benchmark. Yeah. So it seemed great. In retrospect, over time, I realized I was a generalist, and that in fact, not my first company, but not my second company, third company, the one that exited in the fall, over time at that company, when I started, I was doing everything, right? But as the company grew and we needed more specialists, it actually I became more of like a disruptor in the company, and ineffective and frustrated. And so eventually I came to the conclusion that I needed to leave that company, which was actually very difficult to do, but also it was a very good decision, both for the company and its potential success, and for me as an individual. Like, I tell people often, like, when I left there, I'd been there 7 years. And then when I started to see that and observe that and sort of realize that, like, I wasn't optimal for this type of company anymore, and I put the sadness and, like, ego aside, I realized like I wasn't getting any more stock. It's not like I was going to get anything else. I had a nice salary, but I could apply myself elsewhere, and if that company grew, it'd be the same result. Like if I stayed there for another 5 or 6 years and exited, I'd get the same amount of money that it would if I left and spent those 5 or 6 years on something else. Right. So it actually was better to take my resources and split them elsewhere and let someone else kind of run with it, which a lot of people have a hard time doing. A lot of founders.
So what did you do after you left? You're there 7 years. Do you at this point recognize that there's this entrepreneurial spirit inside you and you want to do your own thing, or is it just, I want to take what I learned, apply it somewhere else?
Well, let's just make sure everyone's clear. Like, the company I'm talking about is many years past the first one we were talking about, the plastic company. This is Velocify.
Which we'll get into,
Right, so that I'd already, like, I'm already clearly an entrepreneur, like clearly starting things from scratch. Like,
so what I meant was the original company that
the original company. When I left there, it was right at the internet, like, boom. Like, and I had met this guy that was a shaker. Like, I don't know if you read my blog post about shakers, but this guy was just like one of these guys that's just like, you stand underneath his tree and like stuff falls. He's a little shady, but and so he was like, he had his hand in all kinds of stuff, and he liked me. And so he's like, come work for me. And so I left and went to work at his startup, and he kind of like maneuvered pieces together and kind of got an exit and raised some money. And so I got a taste of like Startupville, and I got some money, and I was like,
what were you doing there? What was the
I was doing business development, at that time it was still these startups really didn't have like clarity on the roles like they do now. So I was kind of like a little bit of everything kind of thing, but his sort of right-hand man. And that was the first like startup. It wasn't my startup, but it was still that environment. And it was also a little bit more tech oriented. It wasn't quite as much as I later became, but much more than the company I was at. Like we were a manufacturing company at that time. This was getting into like tech and internet. So I was more interested in that.
Yeah. Cool. So, then you're there, you're doing business development. When do you start your own first startup?
So after that company, sort of sold, and I had some stock and I got a little bit of money, and I got my ego like inflated quite large, and I was like, oh, I can do this myself.
These are startups?
Yeah. This is easy, and the internet was like killing it. And so then I started with 5 friends, like actual high school buddies, college buddies. Like we started a company, and we left there. We raised a little bit of money, but it was right as like the internet was crashing down. So it was like the end of it all. And, we really didn't have a business model. Like we were just building cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from that experience. That company crashed and burned, and it was pretty emotional and like painful to go through that, because I was like the heart of that company. It was like my vision, and I was like the guy, and everybody was like behind me and everything.
What was the company?
It was this company. The name of the company was Zoop.
I was going to ask you how to pronounce that.
Yeah, XOP, and it was basically interestingly, like it was kind of ahead of its time in some ways. It was a desktop app. They didn't have mobile phone apps, but it was an actual installable application on PC only at that time, and it was, I guess, a little Twitter-esque in the sense that it like fed content to you into this like toolbar. And there was a bunch of others at that time that were doing some of that kind of stuff, like these toolbar things. But this was like, interesting content.
Like news, or
some of it was news, some of it was more interesting. And we, at the time, hadn't built like a scraping engine to like go collect it all. It was all manually curated by people, which was cool because we got good content, but it was expensive and not really scalable. But it was a content delivery, a la Twitter kind of thing, a feed kind of thing.
Did APIs even exist back then? Like,
not really. I mean, there were custom things that some companies had, but there wasn't like open APIs you could access. But the tech that we built was really cool. Like we built it in the guy we had developing built it in C++. So it was like my first like exposure to like real hardcore software, which I really loved. Like he and I got along really well, and like it became very, very clear to me that like you could build stuff in software, and that became like a very big passion of mine. We also built a lot of web tools to support that product. So we had like administration admin systems, and I think we built that in ASP Classic.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that. I was like, oh, you can build these tools to manage your business, and it really kind of like cemented this thing that I had seen at that first company where it's like they had all these problems, and I was building all these like paper systems to deal with it. I'm like, well, actually you can build a lot of this stuff on the web.
Yeah.
And that's where like business software, and ultimately Velocify was a CRM system. It was kind of that thing that came out of that.
So Jeff, you said after this, Zoop kind of crashed and burned, you were definitely not in the best frame of mind. Like, it was sort of depressing, I can assume.
It was very depressing. Like I went to a bit of a tailspin for a few months.
Yeah. How did you get out of that? How did you pick yourself back up to, get out of that kind of state of mind?
I'm not sure if I can think of like something as like, oh, today I'm going to get out of it. It was sort of just an evolution. I had to.
It was time.
It was time. Yeah, just kind of had to go through its sort of life cycle. I think maybe I've learned now that like, as much as I want to avoid negative emotions, it's like my default, like, oh, negative emotion, like get away. But actually, like the healthiest thing is to like just sit with that, and it eventually will go away. So, and I did do that, but it wasn't by design. I think now when I get those feelings, like I'm like, oh, okay, let me just sit back and let that pass.
Yeah.
So it just took some time, and I needed to make money. And so I was just like, I'll just build web tools for people because I knew how to do that and I liked it. And I had a few of these friends that were programmers. I wasn't a programmer at that time. Yeah. I don't even know if I would call myself a product person, but I think I was. But I was like, I can build things. And so I just built this company called ThinkLogic. It was just a consulting firm. We'd build anything anybody wanted, but mostly business tools, not so much like fancy graphical websites. And so it was actually quite fun because I would go into a company and they'd be like, here's what we're trying to do, or here's our process, or here's how it all works. I'm like, okay, I understand. Let me turn that into a tool for you to automate it and organize it and track it and let different people do different things. And I did that for a number of years, and it was a nice, lucrative, cash-oriented business. But it wasn't something you could go get venture funding for, and even at that time, like that wasn't even like a thing. Like people weren't really talking about that. This is like 1999 to 2003, 4 is when I was doing that.
And on the back end, was it kind of like your way of saying, you know, I had my first business, it didn't go the way I wanted to. Now let me go into these businesses that must be doing pretty well, but see like what's missing and see what could improve them, and maybe like find something that is going to become scalable. Like I
didn't have that thought. No, I can't give myself that much credit. I didn't think. I was just like, I can build stuff.
Yeah.
I can probably find people that need stuff built that don't know what they're doing. Let me go build stuff.
Yeah.
It wasn't, many times I credit my partner at Velocify, who was also one of my partners from Zoop, who I went to college. He went to a different college with my best friend from high school. So we became friends. We weren't like super close friends, because out of that startup that like crashed and burned, like a few of those people, those relationships were never the same. Like one of the guys was like my roommate, like best friends from high school. Like that guy and I, we talked from time to time, but it damaged the relationship. This guy, we didn't have a previous relationship, and he was an engineer, and so we stayed friends, and he was doing projects for me, like consulting projects for ThinkLogic, and then he went to USC to get his MBA. And what was interesting is that he was an engineer that wanted to become a business guy. I was like a sort of business guy that wanted to be more on the engineering and tech side. But anyway, he went to get his MBA, and he was working for me on the side. And then when he graduated, this was like late 2003, early 2004, he was like, dude, this ThinkLogic thing is cool, and you're making nice, you know, salary and money, and you're building fun, cool stuff, but there's no like asset here. There's nothing that you can really build and sell. Like no one's going to buy this company.
It's more so like a service business.
It was a service business.
And that was my question. Like I was kind of curious, like did Velocify start out of a project through ThinkLogic?
It did, but it wasn't because I had that intuition.
It wasn't
at that time.
intentional.
It was intentional, but it wasn't my intention. It was Charles that came into this situation, and he was like, whatever he had learned in school, the one nugget that he got from his MBA program at SC was, dude, you got to like build something. What do you got?
Yeah.
And I was like, let me think about that. And it really like completely transformed my thinking. And I went back and I looked at everything I'd been building over the last like 3 or 4 or 5 years. And I realized that like there were assets there that could be productized and turned into a SaaS application. That's how we spun out Velocify. And in fact, ThinkLogic essentially incubated that company. Like it was one of the first sort of incubation type scenarios where ThinkLogic had an office, we had revenue, we had people. So we basically paid the bills while we developed this product. And eventually the company was originally called Leads 360 before it was called Velocify. Eventually that sort of had enough of its own resources that we spun it off into its own entity. And then I left ThinkLogic and sold that off to another guy, and then who still runs it today. It's still around.
Wow.
And he does quite well with it. And that's how Velocify was born.
So during this time, are you really hustling to get business, or is it just mostly people that know who you are and know your work that are coming to you?
On the ThinkLogic side?
On the ThinkLogic side.
It was a combination. Like I would get a referral, but I became very good at sales. Like I was always pretty good at sales. But at this company, I would go in and like actually sell the deals. You know, someone would be like, oh, I talked to these guys, they need something. And I go in, and then it was in the understanding of their problem, which is really, you know, at the time I didn't know what it was I was doing. But now looking back on all the materials and all the like startup stuff and the same stuff that I teach my students, you know, it's like identify that acute problem and like build the solution to meet that acute problem. Like that's what I was doing. I'd go into the company and I'd listen. I'd be like, okay, I understand what you're trying to accomplish. I understand your problem. Let me solve it for you.
Right.
And that was the magic at that business.
So when Charles came to you and said, hey, like you got to build a product, what do you got? And you went and looked back at your like repertoire of like products that you had built. Why did you choose Velocify? Was it one of the ones that maybe you saw like time and time again, the companies that you're working with had that problem or issue that Velocify was solving for them? Or were you just like the most passionate about that?
No, it was a perfect storm of things that made it sort of come to be. One what I realized is like a lot of the stuff I'd been building was kind of CRM systems. But in the last year, there was another guy who was part of the founding team at Velocify or Leads 360. It was still called Leads 360 when I left, so that's kind of like the name that we like.
Yeah, the original
that's
baby
the
name.
real name.
Yeah.
But this other guy, Scotty, is a great dude, still friends with, was doing like outside sales for me. He was trying to like bring in deals. We had met back at the Zoop days. He was involved in some shady thing that I was involved in. Whatever, we became friends, and he was out there selling deals, and what he sort of stumbled on, and I don't know if he really realized this or not, but he saw this like that there was a lot of mortgage companies that were growing at that time, right? And we didn't deliberately be like, hey, mortgage is on fire, like this whole subprime thing, like we should get into this. It wasn't like that. He was like bringing in deals, and they happen to be mortgage companies. They happen to be these subprime mortgage companies, and so the things we were building for these guys, they were exactly the same. They were basically these lead management systems. Mm-hmm. And instead of building one-offs, I would reuse code, but it was like their system, their system, their system. That's where we discovered like, hey, maybe we could build a system for people that manage leads. And that was how Velocify came to be. So it was Scotty that found that little hole, the little opportunity, which ended up being a big opportunity. I mean, we like... a lot of startup success has to do with luck and timing, and you can somewhat manipulate that, but not fully. And the timing was huge in terms of the mortgage boom. Unfortunately, it was on the backs of bad process, and so like we participated in that and enabled that in a way. But there was so much money coming into these mortgage companies through these subprime loans, and these companies like Lower My Bills and Lending Tree and all these guys that were generating just leads and selling them for like $30-$50 a pop. That industry was just exploding, and so we came in the right time with a tool that optimized that process for the mortgage companies who were spending tons of money marketing, and the lead companies that were spending tons of money generating leads. But the mortgage companies were ineffective with these leads. And so that was like the problem that we identified. Mm-hmm. And it turned out to be one of the most important discoveries at Leads 360, certainly, but in general in my career. And I tell this to a lot of founders, like partnerships often don't work. Like business development partnerships rarely work. And the only time they really work or have a high probability of working is when like you're actually enabling the partner to do their current business better. Like if you try to go to a partner and be like, hey, you're already selling to these guys, you should sell my product too. Or like, we could do this together, right? Then they're trying to like move away from their core competency to help you, and you're trying to move away from your core competency to help them. But when your core competency actually empowers them to do theirs better, and that's it, they're going to get behind it. And that's what happened. Lower My Bills was the big one, but all the lead companies were selling leads. But the mortgage companies were ineffective with those leads. We basically came in and said, hey, lead generator, we're going to make your client more effective, which means they're going to stick longer and buy more. Oh, okay, perfect. That's our problem. That's our core problem. Hey, mortgage company, you're buying these leads and they're not working. We're going to help you make them work better. It was a win-win for both those guys. So we were able to get clients and we were able to get referrals from the lead companies. It was like the perfect storm. So we grew like very fast on that circumstance, which in the end it crashed and burned. And like we basically cycled through almost 100% of our clients in 2008. Like we almost went under in 2008. Like it was close.
Wow.
Like, I had to fire a ton of people. I remember being in Hawaii with my wife on our baby moon, and I was talking to our VC. We'd raised one round at that time. And I was like furious. Like he was like, "No, we're not going to give you more money. We're running out of money." I'm like, "Fuck this! I'm just going to shut down the business. Like I don't care." Like it was that close, like to just shutting down. And we ended up getting some more money out of them and keep going. But 2008 was rough for us.
So how did you come out of that?
We had raised originally $5 million. I want to say was our original raise from them. And then this is Rustic Canyon here in LA, and there wasn't a lot of VC. There's a whole story behind how we raised money. That's actually interesting too. But we needed more money. We were running out of money, and we were losing clients left and right, and we needed just time to weather it and to shift our focus and stuff. And I was able to get them to give us another $3 million, which was enough to get us out of that hole and start to diversify into other categories and have a stronger business. But it was close. It was close.
So Jeff, tell us about this fundraising story. It seems like it's an interesting story based on what you were saying. And I know that especially nowadays, it just seems like left and right, you're hearing these stories of this company raises $30 million, $20 million. It just seems like there's so much money out there.
Yeah.
And, I'm particularly curious as to where that money is really coming from, but also where it's going to lead to. During that time, was it number one, was it easy to get that kind of money? And number two, I want to hear the story.
Yeah, it wasn't a thing. Like we raised our first round in maybe 2006, and just it wasn't a thing. Like there was no accelerators, there weren't like seed funds. There were angels, but there wasn't a infrastructure. Definitely not in LA. Like San Francisco and Silicon Valley, it existed, but still it was the big VCs. So we were like talking about maybe raising money, and Charles and Tony, my two partners, were like not sure about it. They were kind of like didn't know, and I was like, I'm gonna go down this path and see if I can like figure something out. And I went to this fast pitch competition, which was run by the Tech Coast Angels, which was around at that time. They don't do this pitch competition anymore, but it was at UCLA Anderson, and it was like 10 companies. You get 60 seconds to pitch your company, and then they had a panel of investors that will rate you or whatever. And I murdered it. Like I won. I killed it. I won the competition. I won every category. Like they had to not give me categories because they were like, "Oh, we can't let this guy take all 4 categories."
Do you remember that 60-second pitch?
Yeah, I have the audio. I have the audio still. I play it for my students sometimes. Okay. Yeah, and
we might have to add that to the podcast.
You can put a link to it or whatever. Yeah, it's I like wrote it. I practiced it. It was shocking to me. Like, even though I wasn't like a great student, like I guess I learned some things. And one of the things I learned is like, here's the instructions. Like your pitch has to be done in 60 seconds or you're going to shut the mic off. So like I was sure I was going to be done in 60 seconds. Like I practiced over and over again to make sure that it was done. Yet there were so many people that got up on stage that did not complete in 60 seconds. And they just got cut off. And it was just like, dude, they told you that. What are you doing? And a lot of the pitches were just like confusing and not clear. And, we had a lot of wind at our back. Like we were generating at that time a couple $100,000 a month in revenue. So it was like pretty attractive. But my pitch was really clean and clear. And I met one of the partners from Rustic on that panel. And then they later eventually did invest in the company. We had like 3 or 4 term sheets after that. But it was pretty exciting. Like I came back. I remember my partners, had really no idea that I was doing that. I think I definitely had told them, but they weren't like, "Oh, dude, this is awesome. Like, let me help you prepare." They were kind of, I don't know. They were kind of not really into it.
Let Jeff do his thing. I'm
they were like
sure
that.
He's going to come back with nothing.
Right. It was kind of like that. I sort of felt a little bit alone on it, but I came back and like, dude, I won the competition. I met these guys, and they're like, "Oh, okay, cool. Let's see what happens." Yeah. So that ended up leading to raising from those guys, and I learned a lot. Like we got term sheets from like 3 very different groups. Like these were like classic LA VCs, big fund, very traditional style. Then we had like a guy from San Diego that was more of a hustler, kind of just like cool guy, smart guy. It's a much smaller fund, more of a seed fund kind of thing. And then I met this guy up in San Francisco. I'm still friends with him too, who was probably the smartest of the guys that we had met, but also smaller fund, more boutique, like was kind of just early getting into the game, didn't have as much pedigree. And his terms were not as attractive. Like the most attractive terms we could get were out of Rustic. In the end, I think we didn't really get a lot of value from Rustic. They were on the board and so forth, but they weren't that helpful really.
It wasn't so much like a strategic partnership. Yeah. It was kind of just like, right now we're crashing and burning. We need money. Like,
well, no, at that time we were killing it. No, we weren't crashing and burning. When we first raised the money, I was crushing it. Yeah. That was before mortgage. When they gave us the second tranche, that's when we were crashing and burning. But they just weren't, they weren't that involved. They really weren't operators. None of the people that worked there were operators,
Jeff, when you say one of them was smarter than the other, or just the use of the word smart, what made them smart, or what do you consider smart when it relates to the VCs at that time?
Well, the one guy was like, when we'd sit down with him, he was like very thoughtful about like, okay, well, are you going to do this? Do you think we should do this? Like, what about this product? Or like, how does that? Cause like he was really into metrics and like very like in the business. He was like another person I would be having at a table talk about how we grow this business. and that I didn't get that same type of, closeness from the other guys. That's what was smart. But to be honest, like I've really not seen any LA startups have that kind of positive experience with their investors. I mean, I've raised money since, and I've helped a lot of companies raise money, and I've rarely seen where like the investor is involved to the extent that they actually make an impact. Like,
why do you think that is?
I mean, it's just a combination of things. Like one, like that's not their business. Their business is finding companies investing and then finding another company to invest in. It's like they want to help, but they can't. They can't.
More so like a lack of time and resources.
It's a lack of time and resources, and then there is lack of experience. Like not a lot of VCs are also startup founders. There are some, the Mark Susters of the world, who like started and sold a company, and there's certainly more there are today. Yeah. But even then, like Mark Suster's on your board. He's going to come to the board meetings and give you some good nuggets. But like other than that, you're not talking to him like every week and like trying to figure out where to go. Like he's just busy, Yeah. So I don't think that's as common as people like to think it is. Just not the case. And even in the accelerator world, like when we started Amplify, that was part of the idea. It was like, we're going to get in the trenches with them and like help them build their companies and like really be involved. We didn't have time for that shit. Yeah. Like there was no time for that. Like
So talk to us about Amplify. You started this while you were still building Velocify.
No, that was right as I was transitioning out of Velocify. So at that 7-year marker, I was, I had built a transition plan to leave Velocify, so I didn't go from like, big salary cold turkey. Like I'd kind of like, okay, I'll go 3 days a week, and then 2 days a week, and then 1 day a week. And during that time, I was talking to people trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And that's when I met Paul Brico, who had the idea and like had gotten some people interested in putting money behind it. And there wasn't really an accelerator in LA at that time. Like Mucker hadn't started, and Start Engine was the very first to launch. Yeah. But they didn't really have a fund behind them. Was
Science
different.
Back then?
Science hadn't started yet, and even the one that Suster, that Upfront or whatever their name company was before, they had one. I can't remember their name of their fund, but basically no one had launched.
Launchpad.
Yeah. So none of them had launched, and then so Paul was kind of working on it, but everyone was kind of working on one, and we all launched literally like the same week. It turned out in the end, but he and I hit it off, and he was very good at like bringing pieces together and raising the money, which I wasn't really interested in doing. I was interested in like building this engine to like, fund companies. And that was like a new thing to build. That was interesting. And so it was a good match because he's not really like, he doesn't do that. He's not good at that. So it was a good complement. Yeah. And so then I left Bleeds 360, and then we started Amplify like August of 2011. And then we closed our first fund in like, October of 2011. And then I was there full time for a few years.
Yeah. So kind of like going back to like when you wanted to start Amplify, like tell us kind of about the vision that you had for, I know you guys are like focused on the community as well, like of LA.
Yeah.
Because, LA wasn't really a very big, like, Silicon Beach, I don't think existed back then.
The name wasn't there.
Yeah, but it was like,
Craig had
companies
like mentioned it at parties from here and there, but it was like
right. It was like just on the cusp. So what did you envision, and has that vision? I mean, clearly it's come to life, but like, tell us about the kind of the early days of that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big part of what Paul wanted to do, and what I felt like I could, lead the charge on doing, was to kind of create a community. And my thing was, co-working spaces were not that big at that time. I was like, let's make a co-working space inside of our facility, so we have like this like community here of people that are coming. Like, yeah, they're going to want to get funded by us, but like we'll have this energy always. So that was a big thing that I sold them on, and we did, which helped. And then I did, every event I could for the first year. I was on every panel. I was just like all over. I was very active in the scene, and Paul was certainly very visible as well. And so that plus Mucker plus Launchpad plus all these guys like creating this energy, funding actual companies, it was a catalyst for that. So like there's no question that I was like a big part of launching the LA startup scene. Mm-hmm. And it was fun. Like, and I thought when I did this, I thought that one of the things I would really like and that I'd be really good at was helping other startups, get money, build them, especially when we were thinking about we were going to be involved. In fact, at the time, I wanted to not only do a co-working space, which we did, but I also wanted to do like a General Assembly education thing. In fact, I tried. General Assembly was very new at that time. They were just in New York. And I was like, I tried to get them to co-brand a program with us out of our facility, which they ended up doing with Launchpad, which I was kind of annoyed at because I was like, I'd proposed that idea. And they didn't do it with us. They did it with Launchpad. And it kind of didn't work for Launchpad, but it did work for them. They started to grow in LA. But that was a big part of it. I was like, we got to educate these people and give them skills and like training. And plus they could be a great revenue stream. Like I was always about how we can make money with this thing as well, not just for investors and for founders, but like how could this business be self-sufficient and not just rely on raising funds? Because if we were going to have all this other stuff. So that was a big part of it. But like I started to say, I thought that I'd have more time to work with the companies. And I thought that I would really like doing that and like investing and would be good at it. And I think I was good at it. Time will tell if we with our exits at on the deals that I was involved in. We've definitely had some exits. It's a long
game for sure.
It's a long game. But I didn't like it that much. And I missed actually building shit. Like I wanted to make stuff. And I didn't get to do that. And a lot of times I would sit down with a founder if I could, and I'd say, here's what I think you should do, or here we'd work out a strategy, and then they'd go off and they wouldn't do any of that stuff. And it'd be frustrating.
You were basically the VC that you wanted.
I wanted to be the VC that we wanted, yes, which I couldn't actually be from a resources standpoint, but that turns out I didn't actually like to do because I wanted to be on the building side, So that's ultimately why I left Amplify, because it was a pretty sweet setup. The gig was pretty good.
And aside from like your personal kind of vision and for your life and like characteristics and traits and things that you enjoy doing, what is like the hardest part about launching a fund like that and an accelerator program and an incubator and all these things in one?
Well, raising the fund is the hardest part, and Paul owned that. That was like I wouldn't have been able to do it on my own. I just didn't have the relationships to raise. We raised like $5 million in the first fund, and that was 90% him. I think I went to a bunch of the pitch meetings and like I built the decks and like I helped make it come to life, but he got those people like on board. And a lot of people were just like, oh, it's Paul, I'm going to put money in. So that was essential. And that's one of the things I realized that right away. I'm like, this could actually happen because this guy can actually close, like fund. And he subsequently has closed, I think they've done 3 or 4 funds since I've left. So that was a big part of it, and it's really hard to do that without having actual cash. Now, it's like one of the big things that we offered is like we give you real money. We're not just like one of these accelerators where it's like we give you advice. But we're like our deals had money, and over time we gave more money. We found that initially we were doing $25K, which was kind of the number at that time, the whole YC number. And then do a lot of deals.
Which I think is 50 now, right?
It's maybe 50. So we were like, that's what we'll do, and look at a lot of companies. And we found that, like, 1, it's a lot of work to look at a lot of companies and like evaluate them effectively. 2, there's just not a lot. There aren't as many fundable companies as you would want. And so and 25 grand isn't shit. You can't do anything with 25 grand. So we basically started to see that it's like it's really more money to less companies. Be more restrictive on who we fund. Like pick the best. And then give them more money and more resources. And that's how the company like evolved. I think they only do like maybe 5-7 deals a year now.
And what were you looking for, with these companies? Was there anything specific that you guys consistently looked for?
Maybe the standard startup stuff, like are these guys, have they really identified a problem? Do they have some product in market that seems to be addressing that need? Have they looked into or figured out any kind of, user acquisition strategy? Does this thing scale to a point where it could be subsequently funded? That was a big piece. Like we weren't going to put money in a company that wasn't VC fundable. Like we were just the first step at seed, then VC, then Series A, Series B, whatever. So every company we had to see that path, and if it didn't have that, it wasn't a good fit. It might have been a good company, and I think that's a big thing that a lot of founders get tripped up on these days. It's like I got to build a company that can be $1 billion company so I can go raise money. Okay, you can do that, and there's certainly it's attractive in certain ways, but like there's nothing wrong with a company throwing off $1 million in cash flow that no one will VC fund, but you're putting $800,000 in your pocket every year.
Right.
Like, dude, you'll do that for 5 years. Chances are, if you're lucky enough to exit, you're not going to make that much money.
Jeff, I think that a lot of millennials, and I hate the word, but that's what they call them, and we're both millennials, unfortunately, I guess, but we get pretty bored pretty fast with what we're doing, and I think when you have so many ideas and you are creative and you want to do all these things, and in your case, you want to build things after realizing it, how did you deal with that boredom or, being complacent or being in that same place for too long? Was it distracting to you? Did you try to always find a way to do something else? And how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, the more and more I realized, and now I'm like as clear as I've been about it, is like the smaller the organization, the more shit I can do, and the more good I do, and the less bad I do. So like really, now I just want to have like a lot of little teeny companies. I don't really want to build a company with 100 employees. First, I'm going to push myself out of a job anyway. If I build something that happens to have that trajectory, that path, then I'm going to find a way to get someone to take it over from me and move on to something else. But when it's like less than 10 people, I get to do a lot of different stuff, and it's useful. So that's sort of what I aim to do now, which a lot of those companies stay that size, but I'm fine with that.
Yeah. So since that time, you kind of had this itch to go back into doing your own thing, creating your own product. You've created 2 companies. Is that right? Affinity and AudioJoy?
Yeah, since then.
Tell us kind of how those came about, what you saw there.
So I got back together with Charles again after that. So he had, what did he do? What did he do? He was kind of doing different stuff. I don't know if he had joined any company or whatever, but during the time, because he left Leads 360 before I did, maybe like 2 years before I did. So he was kind of off on his own, doing a lot of mobile stuff, doing a lot of engineering. And so we were still friends.
Sorry to cut you off. By the way, Velocify was sold, right? After you left.
Not till just October.
This recently.
Yeah.
So Charles wasn't there at the time.
No, all the founders had left. I was the last founder to leave.
Got it.
When I left in 2011, Tony had left in a year prior to that, and Charles left like 2 years prior to that. And so... yeah, but then it sold in October. So Charles came back into the picture and was like, he wanted to do something. He knew that he needed someone like me that could like put the piece together, and he wanted to do a lot of engineering and wanted to do mobile stuff. And so we just kind of started messing around with different things like on the side and just building different apps and trying to figure out where their problems were and, just experimenting really. And at that time, the whole mobile messaging thing was starting to like really take off, and we got interested in that and built a few prototypes and thought that there might be some opportunity there. And, we probably could have done a better job at like the whole customer development, identify the problem even then. And I had had all this experience leading up to there, but it's still tough. It's still hard to do. Like that's what you were trained to do. And that's what all the documentation explains. But it's like, it's still a lot easier just to build something and then find an audience, even though that's not the way to do it, right? You want to find the audience and the problem and then build. But so we have done a little bit of it, but not, and probably enough. And we basically started building this like messaging as a service platform, similar to like Layer. There's a few other companies out there that were doing this, but we were trying to tap into this like micro community interest thing where like we saw that there was these mobile apps that were like friend-to-friend networks, the Snapchats, the WeChats, all these things that were like, hey, you come in, you find your friends, and you like, but they weren't organized like interest-based communities. Like GeoCities, for example, is like an old one. It was kind of like the early days of that. But we saw that there was these hyper interested people, and we were like, the hypothesis was that if you brought them together in this messaging environment, which is a very engaging environment, could you build these little communities into something? And could we connect them all through this one platform? So it's like maybe you come in through the like parenting community, but you also have interest in the like, weightlifting community. So they like cross over, and the whole platform was designed to manage all that. And we eventually built like SDKs where other apps could integrate all this stuff. So that was kind of the vision. We, along the way, to test all of our things, we built our own apps. So we just launched a bunch of micro communities and tied them all together. We must have launched like 100 different communities. Like some things that were as niche as just a movie, like we had a Hunger Games community. And like there's actually one company that did the exact same thing and is still doing okay. It's called, I can't remember, but they have like hundreds of different little communities. I can't remember the name of it.
And when you say like, so these are all separate apps?
They're all separate apps, but they're interconnected. So you could theoretically come in one door and communicate with people on other apps by like just adding those topics to your feed, and you would find people. And so you in your list of rooms, you could have rooms about all different topics that were essentially coming from one centralized system, but they were being deployed. So when you come into the parenting app, the default stuff you see is parenting. But if you explore deeper, you can find everything else we had. That was kind of the vision. In the end, we found that like it didn't really work. We couldn't grow the communities on our own. We couldn't find enough places. Like what our theory was, we'd go to places where communities existed but weren't engaged. So we'd go to a content site, like even take like a BuzzFeed and be like, hey, you've got these people that are consuming, but they're not engaging with each other. Maybe they're doing comments, but comments aren't nearly as engaging as chat. And so the whole thing was like, how do we empower these entities that already have a bunch of people and get them to come together to stay longer and make more money off through ads and things? That was the vision. And it was just never like that important for those companies. It wasn't that painful. Like things were working. So maybe you were ahead of the time on that too. Maybe eventually they will see that there's still an opportunity to do that, but it became very difficult to sell. What did happen though, which happens a lot with startups, like, a la Instagram, is you build one thing and then you see another, So one of the things that we did is we built all these micro communities, and one of the communities, which was this like super hardcore geek community we called the app geeking. These people were like hyper engaged, like super engaged, and like it grew organically, and it was a nice community. And we started getting into like monetization and building ad tech and like all this other stuff.
What was the community about?
Just geeks. It was just like people that were into comic books and cosplay and role play and like all this stuff. And so we started to focus in on that app and try to grow that and get really good at ad tech and how to monetize. And we were like one of the first companies to use Facebook's native ad platform. And in fact, still I would be surprised if there's anyone in LA that knows more about mobile native ads than I do. Like I know a lot. Like we've done a ton of testing and ton of stuff. In fact, I'm in this Slack group with like the best of the best mobile ad tech people, like the head of ad monetization at Zynga, the head of ad monetization at Marvel, like all the major app companies that have big monster apps are in this room. Most of them don't do native ads. Facebook is a large provider of native ads. You know what I mean? It's like in a feed and it fits in. It's not a banner. It's not an interstitial. Right. It doesn't really work so well in games. It's more of a community kind of interface. But anyway, we're really good at that. And we started making a ton of money off this app. It was very profitable. Unfortunately, we couldn't really figure out a way to scale it like, hockey stick scale it. So it was not like we could continue to try and build a big business on it.
That's because your users were also like native. Like they needed to like download the app and be a user of the app. They couldn't come through like some other
Right. We started to shut down these other communities. We just started focusing on this to see if like, hey, can we build an asset here that's really worth something? Beyond making cash flow, and we just could not. Like it was, and I don't know the answer as to why. Like we have 50,000 monthly active users on the app, or 75,000 monthly active users, which is a good number. Like there's nothing to be ashamed about there, but we're not talking about millions. But are there more than 50,000 of these geeky people in the world? Of course. Like why couldn't we find them? Why are we? It's like I'm not sure. Maybe my user acquisition skills are not up to par. It's possible. We did try to like sell the asset to like one of these bigger gaming companies that might be able to take their audience and grow up, but it just never really panned out. But the app still exists. It makes revenue per user. It's astronomical. Like it's extremely profitable app. It just, and it stays where it's at, organically. It's a great little business. But unfortunately, it's nothing that's going to like make the investors in that company a liquidity event. So because of that, and I just didn't want to go out and try and raise more money on something I didn't really believe in. We kind of just like put it on pause. It still runs, makes enough money to stay alive. Maybe someone will come around and buy it at some point. But I started working on other things, and that's when I started working on AudioJoy.
So tell us kind of how that came about.
Well, I had actually worked like earlier. I'd always been interested in audiobooks. Partly back to my early days, I like sucked at reading and English, and like I said, I wasn't a very great student, so I never was good at comprehending books, but I liked books. And then I discovered audiobooks, and especially when Audible became a thing, I was a subscriber. So I was listening to, as early as, 2000, I was listening to audiobooks very regularly. A lot of business books, a lot of fiction.
At that time, did they have it was like on CDs, right?
CDs, but soon, I think Audible started, I want to say maybe in like 2005, maybe. They've been around for a while, and then they got acquired by Amazon. I don't know when, but about then I started using Audible.
And those are, so where were they? Like online?
No, it was on mobile app at that time.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But this is like before the iPhone.
What year did the iPhone come out?
2008.
2007, 2008?
2007? Okay, so maybe it was until 2007. It was about the time I remember probably using it on my iPhone.
Yeah, so it's like
I think the
right
iPhone
when
came out
mobile.
before 2007 because I had the iPhone.
You must
at
have had some
Velocify.
secret like beta.
No, I had a
The only reason I remember that because I was in 10th grade in high school, and I started high school in 2006, 2007. So it was 2007, 2008.
I think you're incorrect about that, but
Yeah.
because it has to be earlier because I had an iPhone at Velocify. Well, I guess so because I left Velocify in 2011, maybe. Okay, so 2007, maybe it was.
But so regardless,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
it sounds like they were
Whatever.
like as soon as the iPhone came out, like Audible was like
It became a
they
thing.
already knew it was going to be a thing.
So I really liked the story. I really liked audiobooks.
Yeah.
I liked consuming audio content. At the same time, prior to that, I was getting more and more into like self-improvement and meditation, and I had gotten sober earlier that several years before that. Maybe what year did I get sober? 2001, maybe? I can't even remember now. It's been 15, 16 years.
Yeah.
So I was like into that space. And so I was listening to some of those kind of books as well. And as I started to think about, and this was still while I was at Amplify, other things, I built some prototypes in the like self-help audio arena, you know, trying to do some different experimenting there. And so I had some assets, a few things that were on the App Store and whatever. And when I started seeing that I was going to sort of fade out of the day-to-day from geeking, I started to think, can I turn this into a real business? And that's when I started focusing on that company, which is basically, you know, it's Audible for self-help. Is this, you know, in simple terms, where it's hyper-focused on everything self-improvement, from productivity to anxiety relief, parenting, you know, meditation, all that kind of stuff. And I just found that there's a huge long tail of very fragmented, talented content creators out there. YouTube channels, Udemy courses, like blogs, podcasts.
Yeah.
And particularly having done audio or video content already, so not just text. That were not books. They were like shorter form, which was a big thing. Like I never really felt that the audio book form is the best for self-improvement content. It's just too long. It's too hard to like put into practice. So I always wanted like shorter content than that. And that's what I started to see was out there. And so started to look, could I license this content? Could I incorporate it and like start to build up a platform of this content? That's basically what AudioJoy is.
So Jeff, would you say that your why for AudioJoy dates back to you sobering up?
That got me into the category of self-improvement more. I was probably always very like I was always looking inside.
Self-aware, yeah.
Yeah, I was probably always like that, but that became much more of a day-to-day thing. It was like a life and death thing. So it became like a big part of my life.
Yeah.
And meditation and all that. And so that combined with the audio format of consumption was where I saw the interest. And I was kind of solving my own problem at that time, right?
Yeah.
Because I was listening to audiobooks, but I felt like that wasn't the right one. And only like the biggest names were getting published in audiobooks, but there was all this other stuff out there that's good, that's not really getting distributed, and there's not a platform to get that stuff out there in audio format. Podcasts are one of the only ways, but I actually don't love podcasts for certain types of content because it's conversational like this. It doesn't really work when you're trying to like educate or help someone as good. I don't, in my own experience.
I think you're right, and I think that especially in this day and age, I hear a lot from folks, especially in LA. It seems as though stress and anxiety and depression is very common. I don't know if it's the traffic. I don't know if it's just the hustle and bustle that comes with the city. But how does someone? I guess I have multiple questions, but how does somebody find AudioJoy, and how do you find the folks that should be using your product?
Well, yeah, I mean that's a customer acquisition challenge, right? That's probably the biggest challenge I have right now, and that most companies have, especially mobile companies. Just getting users is very tough. So I do a lot of different things, and I'm definitely in the scaling that state of the business. I got pretty good at like growth hacking over my years. So like I grew the initial base of the business through various hacky strategies, not like traditional user acquisition strategies. That kind of got me to a point, and then now I can like re-put some of that money into try and like actually grow the business. But it's definitely hard, you know. It's helpful that there's a lot more stuff out there and people are like more aware and they're looking for things. So I get a lot of organic downloads from the apps because of that. But it's also becoming very competitive. You know, it's like, you know, Headspace and all these guys are like, you know, taking up a lion's share. Yeah. But there's definitely a lot of green field, and there's a lot of content that we have that people don't know about. So there's the growth. But I'm moving way slower than I probably could. You know, if I went and raised a bunch of money and like hired a bunch of people and like did all that stuff, I could probably scale it and have a better chance of scaling faster, also a better chance of crashing and burning. But I'm just not really interested in that, you know. So it may be I may, you know, leave a lot of money on the table or get my lunch eaten because of that strategy. But I'm also just like not at the stage of my career where I want to do that anyway. Yeah. So
it's kind of that sweet spot of like, I think I can do this with a small team and
it's okay. Like if it turns out to be like a lifestyle business, like I'm okay with that. You know, and if it turns out there's an opportunity to really raise and like I can bring someone to run it and grow it, like maybe I'll do that. Like there's no shortage of ideas. I could do a million other things.
So is AudioJoy like 100% focused right now for you?
That's
like business wise?
Yeah, that's my most. I do that. I do like still a fair amount of like startup consulting. It's funny, I'm like getting more into that, even though I said I didn't really like that. But I found that when I do it in like a more like focused way where I pick one person or one company or one thing at a time and like really spend some time with them, I can have impact versus just like, you know, this Amplify. It's like way too hard to jump in these companies.
And so are you involved with any of your past projects, or are those totally in the past?
No, I mean, I still run Geeking. Like it still runs, and I'm still, you know, I still spend time on it to keep it going because I'm not going to shut it down. But none of the other projects, like I don't work with Velocify is sold, so I don't have any ties to them at all. Amplify, I feed them deals and I look at deals from time to time, but not super involved there. I have, like I said, a handful of companies that like I help, and some are paid consulting gigs, some are not. I do a ton of Clarity calls, you know, Clarity FM, you know that site?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I
was one of the first people on that site. This guy, Dan Martell, started that site. And if you get that guy, he's a stud. He might live in San Francisco, though. But so I I do at least 2 or 3 calls a week with that. Like I had a call today, I had a call yesterday. It's pretty fun. And then I also teach entrepreneurship in high school. In fact, I teach at the school I went to. Like the funny thing was I left there. They're like, that's awesome. I was like, I'm never coming back here. I like, we
don't ever want to see him again.
We don't want to see this guy. Like, our Arizona State, we want to fucking cross that thing out, right? But then now I'm like a teacher there, and I've been teaching there for 4 years.
What do you teach?
Entrepreneurship. Like, I have a senior class. We created it from scratch. It's only in the fall. I only teach one class. Like, I'm a very different teacher because, like, I'm an actual contractor. Like, there's no other teachers like that cruise in for one class in the fall only. It's like
you're an adjunct, like at a college.
Yeah, it's cool for me because I don't want to get like wrapped up into the bureaucracy of that is high school, public or private. But I like teaching, and I enjoy working with the kids, and it's a great class. And
I'm curious too. What's something that like these high schoolers are now thinking about in terms of entrepreneurship? Like, what are some of the ideas they have or the problems that they have that they want to solve?
Well, funny thing is, like a big topic that all 4 of my classes, at least one group has
mental health, I assume?
Yes, mental health. Yeah. Huge issues. Like, yeah, it's a major problem. It's a major area. They all like see it and know it, especially at like intense schools like Brentwood, where it's like so stressful and aggressive. And even not schools like that, there's other issues. It's just a real like epidemic in a lot of ways.
I agree, yeah.
And so that is a topic that we get into a lot, and a lot of people want to do something about. I've yet to see any of my students come up with something that's like that might work. I don't have an idea of what might work, but I definitely see the problem there.
Yeah.
And a lot of people see the problem. So there's some, and to some extent, like what I'm doing with AudioJoy is like in that space. Like, so maybe I'll discover and crack something else that's just more than just like consuming audio content.
Yeah.
It's an area that I'm definitely interested and passionate about. And maybe I'll get like more into at school, like more work where I'll be involved in wellness, or maybe we'll put together some other types of courses there. But yeah, that's probably the most common thing.
I'm not surprised because I think I hear from a lot of, our friends and, folks that are older than us, younger than us. It just seems to be, and I don't know if it's something that's new or it's just something that's at least more transparent and talked about now. And it just seems like it's on the business side, there's definitely an opportunity, but I think more so it's like, I think it's a real problem that needs real solutions.
It really does need to be addressed, and there is money to be made whenever there's real problems, but it's also, doing good. There's some good to be done, for sure.
Absolutely.
What was that moment like when a business that you started from the ground up was sold for whatever X amount of money? Like, I know you were no longer involved at Velocify.
I mean, I wasn't involved day to day.
But it was still your baby. You had created it.
Yeah.
What was that feeling like? And is it like, how all these people say, like this moment where like just kind of validates yourself?
Yeah, it was very satisfying that like what we had created from scratch like finally has found a way to an exit, and like I felt. Yeah, I remember I was teaching that fall when I was like signing the docs. I came into class and was like distracted for like 15 minutes while I was signing the docs. And the students were like, they didn't know what was going on. And they were like, dude, we're talking to you, like, hey, like pay attention. I'm like, oh, sorry. And the next day I came in after it had actually closed, and I was like, oh, sorry about yesterday. Like, here's what was going on. I was like signing the deal, and they were like, oh my God, it's so crazy. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Awesome. It's very satisfying.
Well, Jeff, it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time and chatting with us. It was awesome learning about your journey, and we're excited to see where all the projects you're working on now go.
Cool. So. Thanks, guys. Super fun. Yeah, happy to do it. All right, guys.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks.